The 2003 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles animated series is considered one of the most faithful adaptations of the original comics. However, some changes were necessary in the transition from page to screen, as the original Splinter was entangled in a vicious cycle of revenge, raising the Turtles as ninja assassins solely to avenge the death of his master Yoshi. As a result, the writers had to develop new mythological elements without letting go of the essential concepts of the original series. Today, I'll talk about the 4Kids version of Hamato Splinter, a heroic father figure. I already covered the original Splinter in another video, explaining the behind-the-scenes process of how Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird created the character. For the 2003 show, Lloyd Goldfine and Peter Laird wanted to stay true to the spirit of the comic and differentiate it from the previous animated version, so they decided not to fuse Splinter with Hamato Yoshi. Splinter was then voiced by Darren Dunstan for 7 seasons and the Turtles Forever movie. But as I mentioned before, the original comic's revenge themes had to change for the adaptation, which led to several changes in the show's mythology. Splinter's story is usually the same as the Shredder's, but from a different point of view. I already covered this Shredder a long time ago, but given how essential Splinter is to the show's mythology, I really have to go over Shredder's origins again. Not only that, Splinter's backstory is the backbone of the show, and to properly explain it, I have to cover key elements like the Ninja Tribunal, the Tengu Shredder, the Utrom Shredder, the Battle Nexus, and the sacrifice of Hamato Yoshi. I promise it will all make sense in the end. Let's dive into it. Around the year 300 AD, the Emperor of Japan summoned 5 warriors to put an end to the Shredder Tengu, a giant demon that was terrorizing the nation. Now, if you know history, you're probably writing right now that Japan didn't have an emperor in 300 AD. Well, let's just say this isn't exactly a documentary. In any case, one of these 5 warriors was Oroku Saki, a great swordsman who ended up making a pact with the Shredder Tengu before killing him. The demon merged with his soul in exchange for power. These 5 warriors were known as the Ninja Tribunal, and they soon found themselves fighting against Saki as he used his power to take over the nation. The 4 remaining ninja had to study mysticism to stand against Saki, which over time transformed them into forces of nature. In their final battle against the Shredder, the Ninja Tribunal defeated him by manifesting dragon avatars. Unfortunately, the Shredder's dark magic was too great. To contain him forever, the dragon sealed him in a sarcophagus and remained vigilant over the Shredder's helmet, gauntlet, and body, as getting these 3 artifacts together would bring him back to life. Centuries passed and the Tribunal's dragons continued training acolytes in the art of ninjutsu, a tradition sustained to thwart the Shredder's revival. Among their students was one known as the Ancient One, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The next significant chapter in understanding Splinter's story unfolded in the 11th century. Oddly enough, it began in outer space. An Utrom named Mortu recaptured the war criminal Shirel after a 100-year search. Shirel escaped, sabotaging the ship and crash-landing it in feudal Japan. Stranded on Earth, the Utroms found themselves without the necessary technology to return home. To blend in while waiting for the advancement of Earth's technology, they created robotic bodies that allowed them to move among humans. I know this sounds like a very long intro to talk about Splinter, but I swear it's relevant, so bear with me. Shirel, who got his hands on one of the early android prototypes, later adopted the dreaded mantle of the Shredder. He formed the Foot Clan to seek vengeance against the Utroms, harnessing the metal from the crashed spaceship to craft a formidable sword of Tengu, capable of unleashing devastating shockwaves. To counteract this new threat, the Utroms established their own line of defense by creating the Guardians. This set the stage for a centuries-long covert war with the Foot Clan, which would continue unnoticed until the middle of the 20th century. In early 1960s Tokyo, the effects of the Second World War were still being felt. 2 orphan kids, Hamato Yoshi and Yukio Mishimi, were begging for food on the streets when a short, wide man passed by, accidentally dropping a coin. This man was the Ancient One. The 2 kids didn't know what to do. Mishimi wanted to keep the coin, but Yoshi thought it wasn't right, so the duo returned it to the Ancient One. Surprised by Yoshi's honor, the Ancient One dared him to snatch the money from his hand to keep it. Mishimi wasn't fast enough to fool the Ancient One, but Yoshi was. Impressed by the young man's skill, the Ancient One offered to buy Yoshi something to eat. Yoshi asked him to also buy something for Mishimi. The Ancient One felt like Mishimi was a bad seed, but eventually agreed to buy both of them some food. Afterward, he took them home and raised them like his sons. They became students, and he trained them in the way of ninjutsu. With time, they grew as brothers and did everything together. They even fell in love at the same time with the same girl, Tang Shen, another orphan raised by the Ancient One. Shen was a very kind person who took care of the housework for the Ancient One. She fed all its inhabitants, even the unexpected visitors like one particular rat that was almost killed by Mishimi. But Shen saved it, saying it was just a hungry, innocent creature. After feeding this nameless rat, she decided to keep it as a pet. Seeing how fascinated Shen was by this rat, Yoshi created a small cage for it. Yet Yoshi was more deeply fascinated by Shen, and she eventually fell in love with him as well. This made Mishimi very jealous. One night as the trio walked through the city, they witnessed the Foot Clan attacking one of the Guardians, the Utrom known as Mortu. Seeing how it was 4 against 1, Yoshi decided to even the odds. This was the first time the two young men would put their ninjutsu skills to use in actual combat. During the fight, something bizarre occurred. One of the foot ninjas sliced off one of Mortu's arms, and his disguise was blown. After the fight, Mortu offered them a choice: resume their ordinary lives without ever getting to the end of this mystery, or join him in the service of the Guardians. The two agreed, and quickly learned about the conflict between the Shredder and the Utroms. The Ancient One disapproved of their decision, believing them unprepared for such grave responsibilities. He harbored a different aspiration for Yoshi, for him to become an acolyte of the Ninja Tribunal. The two young men decided to disobey and began training with the Utroms regardless. In their service, Yoshi was repeatedly promoted, eventually becoming Guardian Prime. Mishimi, however, was passed over time and time again, making his jealousy worse. Yoshi knew about the Ninja Tribunal, and he asked the Ancient One to help him try to enlist them in their mission of defeating the Shredder. But since this Shredder was an alien imposter, the Ninja Tribunal ignored his plea. Yoshi and Shen continued to grow closer, and at the same time, Mishimi and Yoshi started distancing more from each other. This made Mishimi's jealousy even stronger, and one fateful night, he couldn't help himself and ended up killing Shen. That same night, Mishimi betrayed the Utroms and led the Foot Clan and the Shredder to their secret headquarters in Tokyo. This was when it was revealed that Mishimi was now part of the Foot Clan. But the Utroms escaped in pods, something Mishimi wasn't aware they could do, and this didn't please the Shredder. Upon his return home, Yoshi discovered that Shen was murdered. Together with the Ancient One, they buried her under a tree in their land. Yoshi was furious and wanted to go back and face Mishimi. But holding the pet rat, the Ancient One warned him that vengeance was like a splinter. It could get under your skin and poison your life. A now wiser Yoshi infiltrated the Foot Clan castle looking for Mishimi. After reaching the Shredder's throne room, Mishimi laughed at his plea for a duel. Yoshi was surrounded by Foot Ninja and didn't have a chance. But the Shredder, still displeased by Mishimi's inefficacy, forced him to accept the duel in exchange for forgiving his life for the embarrassment they went through earlier at the Utrom base. The sword fight was quick, and with his last words, Mishimi asked Yoshi for forgiveness. Unfortunately, Yoshi was now outnumbered by the clan. Knowing that getting captured would compromise the Utroms, he jumped off the window and escaped. Wanted by the Foot Clan, he couldn't stay in Japan anymore, so he took the pet rat and left the Ancient One. He moved to New York to continue protecting the Utroms there and named the pet rat Splinter as a reminder of what he's done and what he failed to do. Together, they would also remind each other of Tang Shen's beauty, kindness, and love. Again, all of this will pay off. Thanks for your patience. If you remember the original Splinter story, then you can already tell that Mishimi was a replacement for Oroku Nagi. This was a necessary change, as in this continuity, the real Oroku Saki lived many centuries in the past. During their time in New York, Splinter learned ninjutsu by mimicking his master's moves. They were a family and went everywhere together. But Yoshi, like the greatest warriors across the centuries, constantly searched for the greatest challenges. Coincidentally, that was the idea behind the Battle Nexus tournament, also known as the Big Brawl. I've explored the concept of the Battle Nexus in another video, but all you need to know is that it's a place between universes ruled by a being known as the Daimyo. Master Yoshi was once a Battle Nexus champion, and even brought Splinter along with him. That's how close the two were. But things would sadly change one day for those two. The Shredder located Yoshi and sent Hun with some foot ninja to capture him. Yoshi fought honorably, but ended up being captured dishonorably. When the Shredder tried to extract information from Yoshi, the only response he got was, "He who lives without honor will end without honor." Now free from his cage, Splinter attempted to save Yoshi by attacking Hun, marking his face forever. Sadly, as just a small rat, Splinter was no match, and Hun threw him out the window. By the time Splinter climbed back to his apartment, the Shredder had killed Yoshi in front of him. Soon after, Splinter saw 4 pet turtles falling into the sewer along with a canister of ooze from TCRI. He cared for the turtles and the substance mutated them all. In the following days, Splinter realized they were changing in more ways than just physical. After realizing their intelligence was changing, he decided to train them in ninjutsu so that they could defend themselves from the world above. He also named them after 4 Renaissance artists he discovered from an art book he found in the sewers. Before fully embracing his role as a parent, Splinter sought closure for the death of his master Yoshi. So after getting his hands on Yoshi's ashes, he took the turtles to Japan, hidden in a ship's cargo. His ideal was to honor his master's wishes to be buried at the land of his birth, at the Ancient One's residence. But having changed so much, Splinter's existence was hard to believe for the Ancient One. Splinter explained to him that Yoshi was slain by the Shredder, which was a shock for the Ancient One. Together, they put Yoshi's ashes to rest next to the remains of Tang Shen. Something unusual was happening though. The Turtle Tots could see a ghost near the Ancient One that no one else seemed to notice. After hearing that, Splinter realized he could smell some dark magic in the air. You may have questions about what I just said, but remember, this isn't a documentary. Anticipating trouble, Splinter and the Turtles followed the Ancient One to the lap of the gods, the mystical abode of the Ninja Tribunal. The ghost, sent by the Foot Mystic, sought the Pool of Sorrows to retrieve the Shredder's gauntlet, helmet, and sarcophagus. The Ancient One confronted the Ninja Tribunal with the news about Yoshi's death, but they seemed already aware of it. Not only that, according to them, that was always meant to be his fate. This rubbed the Ancient One and Splinter in the wrong way, as it became clear to them that the Ninja Tribunal was too cold and detached and had no problem sacrificing their loved ones. The Turtles managed to prevent the ghost from resurrecting the Shredder by destroying its cloaking amulet, exposing its true form as a bone demon. After destroying the demon, the Ninja Tribunal explained that only those pure of heart could see through the amulet's invisibility cloak, and while that often applied to children, it wasn't very common. That meant that the Turtle Tots were somehow special. They decided to keep an eye on them for the future, but to be sure, they purged all memories of this event from the Turtles' heads. After this adventure, the Ancient One gifted the Turtles some ninja masks, which was how they got their colors. The Turtles and Splinter were sent back to New York, and sometime after this story, the helmet and the gauntlet would get stolen. I'll talk more about that later in this video. Years later, Splinter would return to the Battle Nexus to follow the steps of his former master, who was once a champion of the Big Brawl. Splinter performed very well in this competition, and in the final fight against Draco, he broke his left leg. Despite the pain, Splinter decided to continue fighting, and after defeating Draco, he became the new champion. That is, the latest, greatest champion of all the multiverse. But Draco wasn't happy with the results, and tried to kill Splinter later that day. The attempt was interrupted by Miyamoto Usagi, and a bit later by the Daimyo. The paths of the Turtles and the Shredder would inevitably cross. The Shredder tried to tempt Leonardo into joining his cause against his enemies, which put the Guardians on alert, thinking they might need to destroy the Turtles as well. But when Splinter learned about this, he revealed the details surrounding Yoshi's death to the Turtles, who were surprised he'd never spoken to them about it. Splinter explained that he'd refrained from doing so because he didn't want their training to be tainted by thoughts of revenge. However, with the Foot Clan closing in on them, the Turtles had no choice but to engage in battle. This eased the Guardians' concerns. The Shredder, however, proved to be too strong and resilient for the Turtles, who had to rely on their master's help to escape. The Turtles eventually invaded the Foot's headquarters, but in the battle, Splinter was severely injured. With the Turtles distracted, the Guardians intervened to rescue Splinter and help prevent the Shredder from reclaiming the Sword of Tengu. Following this battle, the Turtles believed Shredder to be dead. Regrettably, when they returned to their master, he was nowhere to be found. Suspecting that the Guardians were involved in Master Splinter's disappearance, they tracked one of them. This led them to the TCRI building, a name they recognized from the canister that had mutated them. Determined to uncover their past, they ventured inside, regardless of whether Splinter was there or not. Once inside, they discovered the truth about the Utroms and found Splinter in a state of stasis. In their attempt to flee the alien facility, they inadvertently activated a transmat device and were transported into space. The Turtles eventually returned to Earth, but by then Splinter was already healed, and most of the questions were answered. However, the Turtles still had further questions about their origins, so Mortu offered them the chance to experience history through the Oracle Pods. This was how Splinter and the Turtles found out that Shredder had been alive for 1,000 years by the time they met him. To their surprise, they discovered Shredder still alive, and the truth was finally revealed that Chirel and the Shredder were one and the same. Before returning to his homeworld, Mortu left Splinter with a gift, some sort of artificial recreation of Hamato Yoshi, similar to the recordings of Jor-El and Superman. Mortu told Splinter that Yoshi was their most loyal guardian, and he even gave his life to protect them. Shredder came back, but he couldn't prevent the Utroms from escaping. With the whole building imploding, the Turtles thought Shredder was finally destroyed. In the aftermath of this adventure, Splinter and his sons were left with many reflections. Splinter felt sorrow for his master's death, but found comfort in knowing that he kept his honor until the end. On the other hand, the Turtles now understood that without Chirel's sabotage of the Utrom ship 1,000 years ago, they would have never been mutated. Shortly after this experience, a warrior known as the Ultimate Ninja challenged Leonardo to a duel. The reason for his challenge was that he wanted to duel the imposter Orokusaki, whom Leonardo seemingly killed. Leonardo had no option but to accept the challenge that he ultimately won. This warrior proved to be a sore loser, and tried to exact revenge on Leonardo, but his father, the daimyo of the Battle Nexus, stopped him. This event introduced a confusing fact about ninjutsu in this universe. The daimyo visited Earth a long time ago and left the teachings of ninjutsu to humans. This story could contradict the other version of how ninjutsu originated, as the doctrine of the Ninja Tribunal. However, you could make your own headcanon to make both facts work. During this challenge, it was clear that Splinter was familiar with everything that was happening, and the Turtles never really got a proper explanation from him. But their chance would arrive a little while later, as they witnessed their master using a portal to access the Battle Nexus. The Turtles realized that this wasn't the first time Splinter disappeared like this. It had already happened 3 years earlier. They decided to recreate the portal to investigate further. It took a while, but the Turtles eventually discovered the nature of the Battle Nexus, and they joined their master in the competition. They soon crossed paths with the Ultimate Ninja, who was still ashamed of challenging Leonardo to a duel. But this was all a facade. In the shadows, the Ultimate Ninja was in cahoots with Draco, with the intention of dethroning his father and becoming the ruler of the Battle Nexus. As a bonus, they would get revenge on Leonardo and Splinter for embarrassing them. One fun fact about this episode was that the Earth from the 2003 universe was known as Dimension 3rd Earth. Leave your theories below on why it was called this. When the tournament started, Splinter faced one of his sons, Michelangelo. The Y-Sensei decided to forfeit, as he didn't want to stand in the way of his son's chances to become champions of the multiverse. But not all the matches went this well. During his fight against Miyamoto Usagi, Leonardo was poisoned by a mysterious figure, and the match was nullified. The one responsible for the poisoning was the Ultimate Ninja, who shortly also orchestrated an attack on his father, poisoning him and framing Splinter for the murder attempt. In jail, Splinter found out that it was all part of a coup, and Draco was the one counseling the Ultimate Ninja. The competition continued, but Draco wanted to put his hands on the powerful War Staff, an artifact that, in the wrong hands, could create a dimensional wound. Draco was powerful enough to use it. However, not being pure of heart, he accidentally created a dimensional rift. The two villains were absorbed by the tear, which was promptly closed thanks to Splinter and the Daimyo, who were recently freed by the Turtles. With things almost back to normal, the tournament continued, and Michelangelo became the latest champion of the Battle Nexus. This victory would later be challenged, but Mikey would defend his title in a fair rematch, which he won. This, however, wasn't a pleasant ending for the Daimyo, who was left almost lethargic after losing his son. Unfortunately, things were about to get even worse. The Ultimate Ninja merged with Draco, and together they tried to exact revenge on Splinter, Usagi, and the Turtles. The duo was defeated, but in the end, Lord Simultaneous, a Time Lord, showed up, and with the help of the Time Scepter and the War Staff, he brought back the daimyo's son as a child for a second chance to live a more honorable life. After this adventure, Splinter had visions of his master Yoshi, indicating that he must protect the Utroms, suggesting an imminent invasion of his home world by the Shredder. In a mission in which everyone nearly perished, Shirel was captured by the Utroms and sentenced to solitary confinement. With that verdict, Splinter finally felt that the spirit of Hamato Yoshi had found justice and would be able to rest in peace. Despite their mission's ultimate success, Leonardo's decision nearly led his family to sacrifice themselves for the cause. This development weighed heavily on his psyche. Struggling to cope with perceived leadership failures, Leonardo heeded Splinter's advice to train with the Ancient One in Japan. Leonardo returned wiser from this training, bringing a gift from the Ancient One for Splinter, a new mystical stick. Upon meeting the adult Leonardo, the Ancient One felt compelled to persuade the Ninja Tribunal against making the Turtles their new acolytes, as he wished to spare them the same fate as his adopted son, Yoshi. But the Tribunal refused his plea, and the Ancient One, feeling powerless and reliving the trauma of losing Yoshi, decided to go to New York to prevent the abduction of the Turtles. Unfortunately, he arrived too late. The Turtles had already been taken for training as acolytes, along with 4 other recruits, to prepare for a looming battle against an approaching darkness. Splinter and the Ancient One returned to the lap of the gods to halt the training, but there Splinter was struck by a vision of his master Yoshi being impaled by the one true Shredder. Once he understood that the Turtles needed to stop the resurrection of the Shredder, he resolved to aid them in their training, despite his deep-seated fear of losing his remaining family, a fear his vision seemed to confirm. The acolytes reclaimed the lost artifacts, the gauntlet and the helmet. However, this victory was short-lived, as the Foot Mystics infiltrated the Tribunal and resurrected the one true Shredder. Upon his return, the Shredder took over New York, turning it into a nightmarish realm. Splinter's visions began to materialize. The Turtles, the Ancient One, and the Acolytes were defeated, leaving only Splinter to face the Shredder. But then, the Turtles' medallions unleashed their dragon avatars, which in turn summoned the spirit of Hamato Yoshi, echoing Splinter's vision. Yoshi temporarily subdued the Tengu Shredder before disappearing, allowing the Turtles to be revived in their dragon forms. With the help of Kurai's connection to the Shredder lineage, the Turtles reverted Shredder to his human form and separated him from his powerful artifacts. They then destroyed these objects to prevent his resurgence. The Turtles returned to their normal states, their medallions shattered, and Yoshi returned to life. Yoshi bisected the Tengu Shredder, ending his reign of terror. Afterwards, Splinter and Yoshi shared a brief but profound reunion. Yoshi seemed to be proud of how accomplished Splinter was, undoubtedly giving each other closure for their respective losses before Yoshi passed on to the next life. The Ninja Tribunal acknowledged that their non-interference was necessary for the events to unfold as they did, leading to the Shredder's ultimate defeat. The paths taken, including Yoshi's move to New York and his subsequent death, were all predestined steps toward this outcome. Yoshi's sacrifice was necessary for Splinter and his sons to exist and face the resurrected one true Shredder. I guess they could have also destroyed the artifacts, but maybe there was another possible future where that didn't work out. Who knows? With all their concerns over, the Ninja Tribunal and the Ancient One were prepared to transition to their next existence. But there were 2 additional seasons after this finale. Splinter and the Turtles were taken to the future by Cody Jones. During their stay there, Splinter gave his blessing to Leonardo for training Cody. However, as they prepared to return to the present, they encountered complications. Their new enemy, Viral, leaped into the time stream with them. The long trip home resulted in a decompiled Viral, forcing Turtle X, Serling's attack mode, to decompile Splinter. Since they were all in digital format while traveling through the time stream, Splinter's data became scattered across the internet of the present day. Donatello was devastated. Viral used Donnie's program to blast Splinter to bits, who wasn't even the intended target. Splinter jumped in front of the blast to save his sons. A damaged Viral searched the internet for something to repair herself and found a digital backup of Shirel. Attempting to assimilate the backup, she was instead consumed by it, resulting in the creation of the Cyber Shredder. It took the Turtles a while, but they eventually found all of Splinter's data bits and recompiled him just in time for April's and Casey's wedding. Well, I guess they reassembled him more than recompiled him. The writers were a little confused about how files and programs worked in real life. Then again, this isn't a documentary. In any case, when they reassembled Splinter, they didn't notice that Cyber Shredder added himself as malware to his data, becoming real once Splinter became a physical being again. This intrusion led to the Foot Clan's invasion of the wedding at the farmhouse. But the Turtles, thanks to a brief distraction by Splinter, decompiled Cyber Shredder again, and the wedding continued as planned. Over the years, thanks to Peter Laird's recollections of his time editing and approving the episodes, we learned some curiosities about this story. For example, in the original pitch for The Big Brawl, Draco was initially defeated by Yoshi, and when he couldn't have his revenge against him in the following tournament, he decided that Splinter would be the next best thing. Peter Laird considered this extra loop in the story to be unnecessary, as it could still work the same without it. He also didn't think Draco would be able to recognize Splinter. There were many drafts for the final episode that Peter Laird rejected. One difference in the drafts compared to the final version was the writer's initial desire for Cyber Shredder to absorb Splinter and all his memories, thereby gaining knowledge of the Turtles' weaknesses. Donatello was to separate Splinter from Cyber Shredder, transforming him back to his organic form, and after a quick fight, he would save Splinter by decompiling the Shredder. This would have been a redeeming moment for Donnie, as it mirrored how the season started. However, Peter objected to the scenario because he considered the writers were confusing the physical and digital worlds in a way that didn't make any sense. An interesting tidbit from these editing notes is that it was Peter Laird who proposed the metaphor of revenge being likened to a splinter under the skin, which inspired Splinter's name. There are definitely many differences between this Splinter and previous incarnations, but by making him a protector instead of a vengeance-driven master, and choosing a name that served as a reminder not to be consumed by revenge, the writers adapted the origin from the comics in a way that elevated Splinter to the status of not just a great hero, but also a profoundly relatable father figure. Unlike the original, this iteration of Splinter often preferred the Turtles to avoid dangerous situations, clearly marked by the loss of his master, a trauma he lived long enough to get closure from. Thanks for watching. See you in the sewers!